Hi everybody, come to Draw So Easy anime channel. Today I would like to share how I draw watercolors for you to see. The color I used is Faber-Castell. Let's see how I draw watercolors. Painting with watercolors for beginners. Watercolor is a wonderful, versatile medium, and one that scares many beginners out of their wits. In this article, I hope to dispel that fear. We'll talk about which palette to start with, how to mix colors, and how to contour. This article includes a tutorial video and a free worksheet to boot. Before I started writing this post, I decided to conduct some online research on painting with watercolors for beginners. That way, I reasoned, I wouldn't gloss over any points, and I could craft an altogether better post. And, holy moly! I personally use watercolors all the time, and the information I found on Google overwhelmed me. After reading too many information overload articles, I threw up my hands and decided to go rogue. In this post, you'll find the simple points that I think are important if you're trying your hand at watercolors for the first time. 1. Watercolors. Watercolors come in 3 different grades: children's, student grade, and artist grade. I believe that the best watercolors for beginners are student grade. I love this Winsor & Newton set because it's got 24 colors, which means you won't need to mix your own colors as much. You really just need one good palette, and you're good to go. Whatever set you decide on, the first thing you should do upon receiving your watercolors is create a color chart. I like to make a chart that fits into my set container. Then I take the chart in. We'll talk about how to make a watercolor chart in a future tutorial, but basically, you cut a piece of watercolor paper that's slightly smaller than your set. Paint samples of each color onto it, label the colors, and your chart is finished. 2. Brushes. Once you've got your watercolor palette, it's time to think about brushes. Brush preferences will vary by artist. I like tiny details, which means I like tiny brushes. My staple brushes are 3. Watercolor paper. It's important to apply your watercolors to high quality paper that doesn't absorb the pigment. Watercolor paper is your safest bet. Watercolor requires special paper because of absorbency. Watercolor paper essentially lets the paint sit on top of the paper until it dries rather than allowing the paint to spiderweb out. If you try to paint on, say, standard 20 printer paper, the watercolor will bleed at the edges because the paper is super absorbent. 4. Water plus cloth. The last watercolor supply you'll need is clean water to hydrate pigments and clean off your paintbrush. You opt for blotting your brush. The general process. Watercolors are very low maintenance. First, start with a palette of watercolors. Next, use a small spray bottle, a blunt syringe, or a spoon to hydrate the colors you wish to use. Then, dip your brush in water to moisten it, dab the brush onto a pigment, and put the pigment-rich brush on paper. That's it. You can control the shade of any pigment by adjusting the amount of water on your brush. If you want a very light shade, saturate your brush in water and barely touch the brush's tip to the pigment. For medium tones, you'll still apply pigment to a wet brush, but you'll apply a bit more pigment than you would for a light shade. For dark tones, I blot water off my brush. It will still be wet, but not saturated. Then I use the moistened paint straight off the palette. Thank you for watching my video. Remember to share, like, and subscribe to my videos. Having fun.